Scott, appreciate you having us here tonight. For me, obviously coming from Brantford Brant, that riding is particularly interesting. We've got a candidate that Doug Ford said is his all-star candidate in MPP Will Bauma, but we've also got the president of the Ontario Teachers Foundation for 4 years, Harvey Bischoff, coming in. So you've got an all-star candidate there as well. So that's going to be a really interesting one, and I know there's a couple of tight races in the Kitchener area as well. What do you think, Andre?
I think every seat in the Waterloo region is interesting, has a story to tell. I mean, Kitchener-Conestoga was a really, really tight margin in 2018. I'd like to see where it's going to go this time. Will Mike Harris keep it? Maybe. Cambridge is interesting because the incumbent is no longer from the PC party. She formed her own party. Is she going to carry some of her voters with her, or is the PCs going to take it again? Kitchener Centre, where would the Liberal vote go? I mean, in 2018, a lot of Liberals swung to the NDP. Will they come back? And what's that going to do to Kitchener Centre and the NDP's ability to hold it? Kitchener South Hespeler, I'm really curious about Weston's profile, because she may pull off a Catherine Fife. As you recall, Catherine Fife was a school board trustee, well known in the community. She won Waterloo. I'm wondering if the same effect can be repeated for Kitchener South Hespeler. And even Waterloo, Catherine Fife, I expect her to win in Waterloo, but will her margin be as big as it was last time? It was 10,000 votes in 2018. I think it's going to shrink. What does that say about the NDP's ability to hold on to its voters overall across the province? So every seat in the whole region has something to say.
Yeah, and the Catherine Fife effect, as you mentioned, it was more of people voting for her as a human being rather than as a party leader. And her success in that first term may really determine what people kind of do and how that ripple effect has across not only other parties, but other counties as well. So with Catherine Fife having success in her first term, what do you kind of see that kind of affecting the other ridings and the other parties as the years go on?
If I might, Catherine Fife has been absolutely a workhorse in the NDP party. She was the finance critic this past go around. She led the She Covery movement in the NDP. She's one of Andrea Horwath's main candidates that she leans on quite heavily. And so when you have a brand like that in Catherine Fife, she almost carries her own name apart from the NDP brand, which is strong in urban centers like Waterloo. She has the ability to attract some vote potential around her. Look at what happened with Laura May Lindo in the last election. She's a beneficiary in Kitchener Centre, mostly because of the strong work that Catherine Fife has put in since she won in a by-election in 2002, was it?
No, later than that.
Later than that, 2012.
Right.
2012. So I think there is a lot to say about people coalescing around the person instead of the party. We know that there's also the opposite is true. And so you mentioned Belinda Karahalios' riding in Cambridge. That one's especially interesting to me because normally when you go into an election, and especially an election where many people are already getting the sense that this is going to be a Ford majority government, you lean heavily on the advantage of being an incumbent. Well, in this case, the incumbent was kicked out of caucus because of a dispute, and as you said, created her own party, co-founded with her husband, Jim Karahalios. And how much of that incumbency is she going to benefit from in drawing votes to the New Blue Party in Cambridge? So that's really interesting to me. I think if there is a seat that they have the strongest chance in, it's probably that one.
Yeah, and over to the Royal City, Mike Schreiner, who is the MPP and the long-running and beloved MPP of the Royal City.
Absolutely.
The leader of the Green Party and will likely be re-elected based on a lot of green signs all throughout Guelph that we've been seeing over the last month or so. His effect. The Green Party was a newer party a few years ago, a party that wasn't necessarily considered a favorite, but Schreiner came in and won people over with his personality and his just very, very truthful approach to his campaign. What have you guys seen from Mike Schreiner in this last term that might really sell the fact that he's going to be re-elected?
Well, I always assumed he was going to get re-elected anyway because he's such a good member for Guelph. But his performance in the debate may have awakened a lot more other potential voters to the Green Party, and that's why he's banking on securing a second seat up in the Muskoka area, which is traditionally conservative territory, which goes to show that there is potential for the Green Party. And we've seen it in other parts of the country. In Prince Edward Island, the Greens, at some part during the campaign, were leading. They were ready to win the provincial election. Would be the first time in Canada that a Green Party would form government. They came in second, so now they're official opposition, which is still better than what they've ever done. So we shouldn't underestimate a potential green swell anywhere in the country.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you mentioned in the intro my affiliation with the Chamber of Commerce. I had the benefit of going to an Ontario Chamber of Commerce conference recently, and we had a lot of the provincial party leaders attend, actually. Andrea Horwath was there, Stephen Del Duca was there, and both of them, to a T, when they heard that Mike Schreiner was also on the agenda, mentioned that he is the hardest working MPP in Queen's Park. Regardless of party stripes, Mike Schreiner just attracts the respect and admiration and esteem of his peers in Queen's Park. And we're seeing that come into play on the campaign trail here. Mike Schreiner, he's going to be pretty safe in Guelph. But what he did, he spent most of his time up in Parry Sound, Muskoka, and you've got Matt Richter, who is really benefiting from, again, that brand of what Mike Schreiner has come to establish. So I think if you listen to the things that Mike has said over the past couple of weeks, he is anticipating not only doubling his party's seat count, which would add 1 and bring him to 2, but I think we're going to see something like that potentially in popular vote support. The early polling suggests that there is a groundswell of people who are seeing the Greens as a viable other option in addition to what has traditionally only been a PC, a Liberal, and an NDP race.
Yeah, it's really taken it from that two-pony race, which was normally Conservative and Liberal, to now NDP, Green, and we go on and on and on. Back to the New Blue. What can they offer to each and every riding that may be a little different from what we've seen in the traditional parties?
Go ahead.
Well, sure. The New Blue Party and also the Ontario Party, which is the other new party that was founded by former Progressive Conservative caucus members who were kicked out or left, or former Conservatives, they could peel away some support from traditional PC support or traditional PC votes. But I'm looking to see if they bring in, and they probably won't, given from what I'm understanding what turnout is in this election, they may bring into the electorate those who otherwise would not have voted or haven't voted because they never saw any appeal in any of the parties. So those are a little further to the right, may look to the New Blue Party as a party that finally represents what they're interested in. I call this the Trump effect because Donald Trump brought into the American electorate people who never voted. That's why he won. It was a turnout victory. And maybe the New Blue can agitate the Ontario electorate. But again, from what we're hearing about early estimates, the Ontario electorate is not agitated.
Yeah, the story of this campaign is one of a little bit of apathy, isn't it? The voters have not really been struck across the face with anything particularly offensive about Doug Ford, enough to get them to really rally behind one of the other parties, nor have they been really hooked by something any of the other parties have done to engage them in, rallying the troops to generate this huge momentum swing. And if you look at the polls, whether it's Angus Reid or whoever, from 29 days ago at the drop of the writ through now, they're very, very modest adjustments to the actual popular voting in the poll report. So, what do we make of it? I think most people are saying that the outcome is really going to be determined by voter turnout. And with a voter turnout that's low, I think a lot of people are saying that tends to favor the Doug Ford camp.
And Doug Ford, as you guys just mentioned, hasn't really agitated enough voters to make them veer away from where they voted in the past years. But as we're forecasting low voter turnout here in 2022, around 47% is what we're hearing is the forecasted turnout. Now, with that, as we mentioned, the new parties might draw in some more votes, and that might end up changing some things. But you have to kind of forgive the party of power, which was the PC party, over the COVID years, where it was kind of uncharted territory where you don't really know what to do. It's not really something that was, there was no how-to guide of how to deal with a global pandemic. And all things considered, I think Doug Ford did a pretty good job with the PC party to keep everyone kind of in line and dealt with it as best as possible.
Well, he's certainly perceived as having handled the pandemic well. There are those who say he could have done a much better job. There could have been far fewer deaths. That they were a little concerned about the government's relaxing of mandates, or at least relaxing all of the mandates. So there is some criticism among some people about that. But the voters perceive Doug Ford as having done a reasonably good job.
Yeah, and while no one would ever point to Doug Ford's track record over the entirety of his first term as flawless, I think what we saw from him during the pandemic was a little bit of, dare I say, humility when he acknowledged some of the mistakes. And it's rather few and far between in the political world that we live in where you see a leader actually acknowledge a mistake, do some course correction, and admit that, you know, we can move things in a better direction. And, you know, I'm not here to say that he did a perfect job. I'm not here to say that he did a terrible job. But I think the way things are leading, if we see another Ford majority government here, we might be able to point to maybe a little bit of that humanity or humility that we don't often get to see in our leaders, and that might be telling.
He was polling terribly before the pandemic. He was the second least popular premier in all of Canada. And then the pandemic hit, and then he rehabilitated his image and his posture, and he became one of the most popular premiers in Canada. It just goes to show that in politics, there's always room for a comeback, and this is what Doug Ford has demonstrated, is the comeback.
Everyone
Absolutely.
loves a comeback, and some polls are rolling in. As mentioned, Cambridge delayed, as well as a few other ridings, so we will get those to you guys as they come. And we do thank you for joining us here on Rogers TV. As we get ready to kind of start seeing these final numbers roll in, we are seeing a few early results. The party results, the PC party with 34 in Cambridge, but again, that one is not quite done yet. So what do we think here in the studio with, are things bound to change throughout each and every riding, or is it overall likely with a low turnout going to be a status quo from 2018?
It'll be mostly status quo. I mean, there'll be some seats that shift back from the NDP to the Liberals, but in the shifting of the votes, there may be an increase in the PC seat count because of the split down the middle.
Yeah, I think if you look at the legislature, status quo is probably what you're going to see in terms of new legislation coming out, how the votes are going to carry in the House, things like that. But that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be some serious implications to what happens tonight. We have Andrea Horwath. This is her fourth kick at the bucket here. She brought her party to official opposition status, 40 seats in the legislature the last go around. Huge win for her that night to displace the Liberals, bring them down to 7 and kick them out of official party status. What's she going to deliver this time? And the last few days on the campaign trail, it's starting to get a little awkward in the conversation about Andrea's future. And we wonder if there's a big decline in her seat count, what that means for her moving forward. The same thing goes for Stephen Del Duca. Rumor has it he's actually in a pretty tight dogfight in his own riding in Vaughan. And if he's not successful in winning that seat, and if his Liberals don't excel and generate a lot more seats than 7, there's going to be some accountability for his performance as well. So although there may be very little change in the actual legislation and the actual government that's formed tonight, the world order and the way that the future of politics in Ontario unfolds does have some things to be informed of tonight.
I agree that there may be some questions and open questions about Andrea Horwath's leadership of the NDP. I'm not too sure about Stephen Del Duca. It's unclear if the Liberals thought that he would win this time around. And maybe they're waiting for the second time around. Maybe they figure, let's see if we can bring the PCs to a minority and then go again a year later. Or maybe just hang on and rebuild the Liberal brand, because it takes about 2 election cycles for a party that is beaten that badly to revive and to rebuild. So right now, it's still young. It's only 1 mandate ago that they were kicked out of office. So maybe the Liberals are planning for a longer game. So I'm not too sure if Stephen Del Duca will resign tonight.
Am I a little trigger happy there? Is that what you're saying?
I think we're used to seeing party leaders resign the night that they lose, but I'm not too sure if the Liberals were hoping to win to begin with, even though they'll never admit that.
Right.
But history shows that it takes at least 2 election cycles for a party that is kicked out that badly to be in position to offer itself as a viable government.
And as the results are still being tallied up and coming in, we are waiting very, very nervously and excitedly for those numbers to roll in and those final counts to be given to us. Again, guys, I mean, it's just been a pretty exciting day and an exciting few weeks throughout this campaign. So here on Rogers TV, we are waiting on the edge of our seats. But anything else you guys like to add before we start getting these final tallies in?
Well, I think it's important for us to see our system of electing politicians into office in action here. And a lot of times in elections past, you'd sort of look down the list of candidates on your ballots and you'd see a variety of other parties, and you wouldn't really give serious thought or consideration to any of those parties. But I think we're entering a stage in our society where there's more open-mindedness towards a New Blue Party, towards an Ontario Party. As you said earlier, Andre, the shift towards a more populist style of politics where people who have felt disenfranchised for a long time have an actual voice that they relate to, if not in government, at least on the ballot box. We're in very interesting times in I believe, a point of inflection in what our society does to elect government.
And you're seeing different offers. You're seeing the populist offer where it just trash the system, go after the elites. And then you're seeing something like the Green Party offer, which is, let's rebuild a better system that works for all. So you're seeing those are 2 among other voices that are being offered, and I think you're going to be seeing more of that. I do believe that we've reached a point where we've had enough of the same old. It's not just that we're bored with the old style politics, it's that people are struggling, they're suffering, and they've had enough of the struggle. And now political leaders have to stand up and offer viable solutions, not just populist rhetoric, but actual solutions.
And actual solutions are what obviously voters are looking for, not just empty promises. And we are actually starting to get some numbers roll in on screen here. So we'll take a quick look at those results as they go across the ticker. The NDP party, Catherine Fife, as we see in Waterloo, leading. And the PC party in behind, and then Harry Bischoff over in Brantford. Brent, you talked about him earlier, Paul. Looks like he might be the early favorite as the numbers tick by.
Yeah, I think we're very early in the polling data there. I'm not sure if the numbers we're seeing are quite up to date, but I expect a hotly contested result there.
Absolutely, and I mean, it just seems like as if, obviously, with the way that the numbers are checked upon, they will be coming in quickly and hotly, but not just quite yet. So, gentlemen, as we digress, in your opinion, what, if any, riding would see the biggest upset or the biggest change in terms of leadership?
Any riding? Well, I would probably think Cambridge, because it went from Liberal to PC to New Blue and now back maybe to PC. So that's one party, that's one seat that has been changing colors a lot over the last couple of years. So that's one seat definitely that will be changing.
Well, I'm going to wave the Brantford flag here for a little bit and say Brantford. This is a riding that had Dave Levac elected since 1999 through 2014, and when Will Bauma came in under the PC banner in 2018, I'm not sure that many people had expectations of what he was going to do to try and fill Dave Levack's shoe. I mean, Dave Levack was Speaker of the House. Again, one of those guys that was respected on both sides of Queen's Park. And now we have Will Bauma, who wasn't only the parliamentary assistant to the Premier, but he was the parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Finance. And those are two pretty high-profile PA roles. And in his time, he accomplished a lot of really important things for the riding. And so now he's going up to bat. He won the last election by 600 votes. As narrow a margin as you could come up with, and now he is in a fight with Harvey Bischoff, who's an incredibly talented, incredibly capable opponent to him in this role, with just a breadth of experience with the Ontario Teachers Foundation, and I think those two are going to have a very interesting night tonight. And I think we're still seeing zeros across the board in that riding.
Yeah, and as we see the party results on the ticker, PC seems to be well ahead with 60, NDP at 24, Liberals at 8, Green Party with 1, and the others also at 1. So a lot of voting left to come in and a lot of decisions left to be made. But gentlemen, you guys are both very well versed in politics, and obviously Andre, a professor over at Laurier in poli-sci. You mentioned the younger voters that come in. How much do you see that kind of changing of the guard in your students as the years have gone on, and the differences in ideology?
Surprisingly, a lot of my students are Liberals. You would expect them to be more likely to favor the NDP, maybe the Greens, but they're all Liberals. I mean, they're all members of the Laurier, not all, but many of them are members of the Laurier Liberal Party. Certainly there's a lot of Conservatives as well, and members of the NDP, but the Liberal Party seems to be very, very strong among my students.
And that, again, I mean, it's a different day and age now with all the information at our fingertips with the internet. The Liberal Party seems to really be popular, as you mentioned, with the younger crowd. And Paul, over in Brantford Brant, the Chamber of Commerce is obviously a big part of the community. But for you guys, what is the ideology with that chamber and kind of the plan moving forward?
Well, it's interesting in a lot of respects because we see, especially with elections, we tend to see more rural ridings swing blue, and we see more urban ridings swing orange or red, depending on who the leading candidate is there. Brantford Brant, as a provincial riding, is Brantford, the city, surrounded by a pretty rural county, with the exception of a few nodes of more urban establishments, and so it's really challenging because you have this broad diversity of opinions, and there's this core that's very concerned about social issues, that's very concerned about mental health, the opioid crisis, social housing, long-term care, a lot of things that just play directly into the NDP playbook. But then out in the county, they're very concerned about agricultural matters. They're very concerned about business matters, and a lot of the voters rally behind a PC banner. And so whether you're Harvey Bischoff or whether you're Will Bauma in this riding, what you're going to try and do is you're going to try and appeal to both the rural setting and the urban voter as well. And that's not a challenge unlike what the leaders of the parties are trying to do. They're trying to create unity across a pretty diverse province. And you get a little bit of a microcosm of that in the Brantford riding. And that's one of, if I could toot my own horn for a second, that's one of the things that the Chamber of Commerce tries to do as well. We have business issues from a rural point of view and from an urban point of view. And it really is about trying to balance those two seemingly divergent but equally important voices that are out there.
And yeah, hard to try to please two very, very contrasting businesses and kind of approaches to life with the rural and urban lifestyles. But it's very hard to please everyone in the world, and politicians have it harder than just about everyone else. So when it comes to that, when it comes to saying one thing to one group and one thing to another, how do most good politicians go about saying the right things to each group throughout their campaign without kind of contradicting themselves from the last speech?
I think the idea is to be about as vague as possible, so that whatever you say can be interpreted in various different ways. And no one's going to say, we're here to stand for the urban financial sector. Sorry, dairy farmers, but you're just going to have to wait until get the crumbs. You have to say you support everybody. You support all industries, all regions. But you basically achieve that by being vague, so that it can be interpreted in a variety of different ways, depending on the context.
And it looks like we may have a winner up on the screen. The Kitchener Centre NDP party leader, Laura May Lindo, appears to have taken the race and been crowned the winner of Kitchener Centre.
That's pretty impressive, because that was one of the ridings we both pointed out was one of our early ridings to watch. The early polling data was a toss-up that could have gone either way. So it's very interesting to see that this early in the polls reporting, they're declaring her the winner, and it's by a clear margin as well. So maybe that's going to lead us down the path of a bit of a surprise on the voter turnout side of things.
Well, I don't know, but maybe in Kitchener Centre the turnout may have been healthier. But I know over the last couple of years, Laura May Lindo worked very hard to earn the trust of the people that voted her in. So she maybe has a lot of personal profile in her constituency. So we talked a little bit about that earlier, about the person rather than the party. And maybe she's bigger than the party. Maybe her brand is bigger than the NDP party. So maybe people voted for her, not just because she's an NDP, but because they like her.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because she had the portfolio of critic for citizenship and immigration. She was a member of the Standing Committee on Regulations and Private Bills, and she was a member of the NDP's first ever Black Caucus. And so on those social files, her role in that, like we said with Catherine Fife when she was elected in the 2012 by-election, her track record has sort of coalesced a following of people who have recognized her personal contributions to the community, and we're seeing her get rewarded here. So a huge congratulations to Laura May Lindo on her win tonight.
And
Absolutely.
As you guys mentioned, by a landslide, 6,413, the final count for Laura May Lindo, in Kitchener Centre. So again, may not just be about the party, but the brand of the leader might be what sells the ticket for the winner, and Laura May Lindo proving that in the early going of tonight's election. So our first surprise winner, I guess, and our first winner and our first crowned leader in this evening's election, guys.
Well, yeah, I think we're getting some news from Oxford. And I'm seeing here that Ernie Hardeman is being declared the winner in his riding, and well, that's not a big surprise. He's been in office since 1995. He has been a Minister of Agriculture, and now we're seeing the voters go right back to their winning horse here, and he's got another strong performance. There's an interesting race developing just south of the Brantford-Brant riding. So south of Brantford-Brant is Haldimand County, and it's not necessarily on our radar here, but the people in Brantford-Brant who are watching are going to be very familiar with places like Caledonia, Dunnville, Hagersville, Jarvis, places like that, and that's Haldimand County. And Haldimand County has been a PC riding for a long time, and that was Toby Barrett, who was in there for at least since '95. I didn't bother to look before that, but he's been in office there for a long time. He retired. He pulled his name out of the hat, and Ken Hewitt, the mayor of Haldimand County, filled the ballot box to become the candidate for the PC party in Haldimand County, but Bobby Ann Brady, who's running as an independent, was the campaign manager and the second in command for Toby Barrett when he was with the PCs. And as an independent, with 13 out of 62 polls, she's leading by 37 to 29 in that race right now. So that's one to keep an eye on, because a lot of people would have thought that would go right back to the PC party. But there's obviously a strong following of the Bobby Ann Brady brand there.
And we're getting news now that Catherine Fife has officially been reelected as well. So no surprise there in talking about brand by leader. Gentlemen, just another very big, clear winner, and not necessarily at all a surprise, but it just goes to show you people like what they know, and Catherine Fife is one of those people that is liked by what people know.
What's yet to determine is their margin of victory at the end of the night. Whether I don't think it'll be as wide as it was back in 2018, but we'll see. If my question is, where did all those voters go? A lot of them stayed with the NDP for certain, but where else did they go? Because I was watching the trends over the last couple of elections, and Catherine Fife benefited in 2018 from that Liberal defection. Did they stay with her? Is the NDP now their new home, or are they going back? So we'll see what happens at the end of the night once all the votes are tallied.
Yeah, Catherine Fife with that big lead right now, but obviously not everything counted so far. So Mike Schreiner, as you see on the screen yet again, a huge lead, and no doubt, or as mentioned, those green Mike Schreiner signs that you would see up and down the streets of the Royal City kind of gave you a tip of the cap on that one. So Schreiner will remain in power in Guelph, and again, being someone from Guelph, he was very, very much well-liked. People loved to see him around town, and he's just a very infectious kind of guy. And when he was campaigning back in 2018, I had the pleasure of seeing him speak, and what he said was, it's going to get worse before it gets better. I can't make you empty promises to say that I'm going to cut this, I'm going to cut this, I'm going to cut this, and get us out of debt. Physically impossible. So he was honest with a lot of people who were listening, and they took that honesty to the bank and were rewarded for it with Schreiner's performance, and he was rewarded again by being reelected.
Yeah, Mike Schreiner is an excellent MPP. He's an excellent party leader. He's an excellent man, as you said, just genuine, very sincere. I've had the pleasure of working with him as well. He came to the chamber in Brantford Brant, and he proposed a white paper on housing. And I happened to work in that sector, and he and I sat down and we spent several hours going through line by line his white paper. And he didn't agree with me on everything, and that, you know what, that's fine, because he was genuine about it, and he brought his ideas to the tables while listening, genuinely listening, sincerely listening, and adjusting his message in subtle ways, and really a lot of respect for what he does, again, across party stripes, really well respected, super hard worker, and truth be told, I think the Green Party actually had the clearest housing policy in their platform. The Liberals were kind of cagey about it. They said they would work with municipalities to end exclusionary zoning. The NDP, again, sort of non-committal, talked about exclusionary zoning. Mike Schreiner with the Greens, we will end exclusionary zoning and make that happen, as well as a number of other things around affordable housing and long-term care. And so from a very, very sincere professional respect, his housing platform was one of the most clearly articulated ones in this race this year.
And again, people with those wishy-washy kind of empty promises that we've seen in years past are maybe kind of turning on their heels a little bit and preferring to have the honest truth told to them. And that, case in point, is shown by Mike Schreiner in the Green Party in Guelph, who the votes continue to come in for Mike Schreiner in the Royal City. So that race all but over. However, still more votes to tally in Guelph. Throughout the other ridings, guys, any sort of surprising early runnings that you guys have noticed as the ticker's gone by?
Well, I see Kitchener South Hespeler on the screen there. The PCs won that by 700 votes last time. So it's looking at the PCs will probably win with a wider margin, which suggests to me that maybe there's been some shifts, or maybe those who moved from Liberal to NDP have stayed home, because that's definitely plausible at this election. A lot of people did not vote, and who were they? They probably were disaffected Liberals who are still not enthused about voting Liberal. So we'll see if that is what's at play in Kitchener-Conestoga.
An interesting one that we've talked about a couple of times is Cambridge, and again, that's Belinda Karahalios' riding, and what we're seeing here is Brian Riddell of the PC party is well ahead in the polls. 23 of 69 reporting. He's polling in at 37.6%. It's a little bit of a toss-up between Marjorie Knight of the NDP and Sarika Shenoy of the Liberals, both at 21 and 20% respectively. And then Belinda's in fourth place at 10.6% of the vote. So with 23 polls reporting out of 69, you have to think that this gambit to form her own party isn't necessarily going the way that she and her husband hoped.
And we are hearing from City News that it is official. The PC party will retain their seat, Doug Ford back for another term, and will actually increase their seat count this go around. So it will be a PC majority government for the next term. Gentlemen, any surprises there?
Nope, not at all. This is exactly what the polls were suggesting weeks ago, and the polls haven't moved, as we talked about. The polls have not moved, so this is not a surprise at all.
Yeah, I think every pollster in the country would have had to dust off their resume if we saw any other result tonight. This was, again, something we all really envisioned coming in here. But the reason why we're doing this here tonight and why the viewers are tuning into this channel is because the local races are still to be determined. And although we really did kind of have a sense that we were going to see another Ford majority and probably a large majority, the nuances of how the local fabric turns out is what's interesting here, because there's still a lot of undetermined results in our local ridings.
Yeah, and that's obviously what can make a difference as the years go on, especially locally. That's kind of what hits closer to home, pardon the pun or the metaphor there, but closer to home is obviously going to be what people are more voting for rather than that majority government, and that's just the way the cookie crumbles here up in the Great White North. But with Doug Ford back and the PC government in control with a majority government, that obviously means a lot of things that we got to get to know about over the last few years will stay kind of as status quo after such a long Liberal control of the province and the country. For you guys, is it something that is it going to change in the next 4 years? I know it's kind of hard to forecast, especially now after a big landslide win for the PC, but...
Well, I think one of the things we were talking about before we went on air was the idea that the voter base isn't really gripped by any terrible wrongdoing of the Ford government, and neither are they gripped by any heroic message or vision coming from any of the other party leaders. So without having a crystal ball looking into the next 4 years, no one can really say, but I think the trend, maybe I'll leave it up to the poli-sci professor, but 2 terms for a premier is pretty standard in Ontario. And, I think a lot of people are looking at Doug Ford. Yeah, I'm not sure about him, but you know what? We're kind of doing okay. And I would have had a hard time managing that whole COVID situation too. And I think that's kind of the shrug your shoulders and move on feeling that a lot of voters had this go around.
I agree. I'm not too sure if the two-term cycle is guaranteed. Don't forget, Bill Davis ran this province for a while, longer than 2 terms. And it's not unusual for a political party or regime to have captured a jurisdiction for a long period, for a generation. Look at Alberta, where one party governed the province for decades, and then another party governed for decades. So it's only the last couple of, I'd say, couple decades that this province has been going through this alteration, mainly between the Conservatives and the Liberals. The NDP had a stint in the early 90s, but for the most part, it's been volleying back and forth between the Liberals and Conservative. This is a relatively new era of Ontario politics, historically speaking, if you look back over its long history.
And we have another final in Cambridge now. The PC party will take control. Brian Riddell winning that race. And any surprise there, gentlemen?
No, I was curious to see how the new Blue Party would fare in Belinda's old riding here. But I think the voters are speaking, and they're more comfortable with the PC brand as opposed to the Belinda brand, at least for the time being. What you can say is that in her first race, she got 10% of the vote with a brand new party, which is more than Maxime Bernier could boast.
All she needs is Maxime Bernier's media appeal, and profile, and maybe in the next election that may translate to a seat or two somewhere in the province. But Cambridge won. The PCs won in Cambridge by 2,100 votes last time, so it's quite a buffer to lose. So I'm not surprised that the PCs won, but it was a question: is how much would Karahalios's profile pull away from that PC margin from 2018? Looks like not enough.
Yeah, and it's good for voters out there who are watching this. We're looking at a majority government here that's going to be elected by somewhere around 40% of the people of Ontario choosing that party as their chosen party. And so there's going to be 60% of Ontario who might be tempted to feel disaffected or disavowed by the leader that comes into power or by their local winner here. And what I would say to that is that the parties are going to look at the results here. Look at what Mike Schreiner is doing with the Green Party. He has one seat, but because of the voter turnout in the past election, because of the polling data, he knows that there's potential in somewhere like Muskoka Parry Sound. And he goes out there and he spends time and he listens to those people and he hears them and he crafts policy around that. And so if you're here tonight and you're seeing that the person you voted for didn't make it into office, don't lose hope, because they're still going to be paying attention to you the next go around.
And Jess Dixon now the official winner in Kitchener South Hespeler, as we see on the screen. Again, no shock, because PC Party has won Ontario yet again, so we expect a lot of PC leaders to continue to roll in as the winners. But in Kitchener South Hespeler, Jess Dixon's approach has obviously been successful.
Well, yeah, and I think this is a interesting riding as well, and this is the riding that I live in. And we were represented by Amy Fee of the PC Party in the last go around, and she didn't put her name in the hat this time. And so although the incumbent party was the PC, Jess Dixon as a candidate wasn't really known to the voters before now. But she's a Crown prosecutor for both the federal and provincial level, and she created this vibe around here that engendered trust and confidence in the votes, at least. And I know she was knocking on a lot of doors. I know that. But congratulations to her, and I think we have another result here.
We do, absolutely. Mike Harris elected in Kitchener-Conestoga. Another PC riding and another win for them. So, again, Mike Harris, no stranger to the win, and it looks like he might take that one by a larger landslide than what shows on the screen already. Over 7,600 votes, with some still rolling in.
The curious thing about this riding is Mike Harris, the son of the former premier, replaced Michael Harris, who's now a regional councillor. And this riding has gone PC for a little while now. And so I don't think we really thought Mike Harris was in danger here, but it was one of those things where you really had to see how it turned out. And
well, he won by 686 votes last time, so he clearly expanded his margin, which is something that I was wondering if it was going to happen. And again, it all depends on who turned out to vote and what happened to the NDP vote that was previously Liberal. Did they go back to the Liberals? Did they stay NDP, or did they stay home? So we'll see. These are numbers that can be determined later, but it's clear that Mike Harris expanded and broadened his margin.
Yeah, and again, like you said, really no surprise. It has been a PC riding for some time now, and Michael Harris, that preceded him, maybe the namesake brought some good luck, or maybe some misinformation, who knows, but Mike Harris retains his seat in Kitchener. So with that, we just kind of now reflect with those early winners that are still obviously being counted, and the other ridings that have yet to be determined here in the studio in Kitchener. From Rogers, I'm joined by Andre and Paul. Guys, this has been a pretty fun early 45 minutes or so in this election evening. What have you guys kind of gathered so far from? There hasn't been really any surprises. We saw Catherine Fife win. We saw Mike Schreiner win. We saw Mike Harris win. But is there anything that you guys are watching on your screens that is kind of making it a bit of an interesting race.
Well,
The Liberal number, the Liberal seat count is still very low.
yeah. Oh. Yeah. That is surprising because they came into this with 7 seats, and I hinted earlier. You thought I might have been trigger happy, or maybe I'm putting words in your mouth. But Stephen Del Duca has to outperform 7 seats. If he doesn't dramatically improve on the seat count from 2018. I'm sorry, but there are going to be some really tough questions in caucus.
I have to agree because I wasn't expecting 8, maybe 12, maybe 20, I don't know, but certainly not a single digit. So if this is the way it's going to settle, I can see a lot of people in the Liberal Party saying, all right, let's review this leadership.
Go back to the drawing board.
Go back to the
maybe.
drawing board.
Will Boma winning in Brantford Brant as the PC leader, and again,
Well, here we are. Harvey Bischoff was a very formidable opponent to Will, but I think what we're seeing here tonight in this huge margin we're seeing, again, the numbers may be a little bit misleading because the polls, there's still a lot of polls to come, but we're declaring him the winner. Will Bauma's track record, PA to the Premier's office, PA to the Minister of Finance, he got Stage 1 funding approved for Brantford General Hospital that has been in the works for years and years and years. And you see Doug Ford coming out and calling him an all-star candidate. I think Will's effort over the past 4 years has been incredible. And he's a guy that is one of the most available, most easy to approach, and he will give you the time of day, even if you don't deserve it. He is almost available to a fault, and so really proud of the race he ran there. I can't skip over acknowledging the other candidates that I worked with directly when we did our debates. Ruby Tour does a great job with what she's doing with Amber Lee as the executive director there. Harvey Bischoff, obviously, I've spoken about his formidability. And Carly Sordas was a great Green Party candidate. She's got an excellent voice for the community. She's got so much energy and engagement, and she's going to be a very powerful voice moving forward. She was the federal candidate for the Green Party and then ran again this time as the provincial candidate for the Green Party. And so excited to see that we have another 4 years of Will here. Really appreciate the strong effort that went into the race from all those candidates. And yeah, we're seeing that the people of Brantford Brant are rewarding him for 4 years of work well done.
absolutely. I'm hearing now that we will get to Mike Schreiner as soon as that is ready to come in. He will give a speech, and it'll be a victorious speech yet again, and definitely an entertaining one. But we will stand by and wait for that to come in. But as we kind of just review now, Jess Dixon, and it looks like we will get to the Green Party preview real quick here, but we are not quite ready to go. But Jess Dixon, the winner, Laura May Lindo, the winner, Mike Schreiner, as mentioned, a winner, and Mike Harris in Kitchener-Conestoga, also a winner. So really no shockers so far, but still a lot of voting left to come in, and the race is never over till it's over, unless, of course, the landslide has rolled in, and a few ridings have shown that so far. Andre, for you, what are you kind of looking for as this night continues to progress and votes continue to roll in?
Well, overall, I'm waiting to hear what Andrea Horwath has to say in her speech. I wouldn't be surprised if it'll be a farewell speech, or at least it'll set herself up for a very soon, a speech that she'll deliver very soon, basically saying that she'll move on and then resign as leader. So that's one thing I'm looking for overall in terms of provincial politics. Locally, it's curious to see how the losing parties will regroup. Like the Liberals particularly, they are not bad in terms of their performance typically in the area. So it's curious to see as to how they will regroup. And even provincially, as we talked about earlier, the number that we're seeing in terms of the overall Liberal count is far lower than I think even what they expected. They were polling second overall in the province, and here they are, a distant third. So it's a question as to how they plan to regroup.
On the Liberal front, I know we're focused on our local our local ridings here, but I'm just looking at Vaughan, and Michael Tobolo, a PC candidate that beat Stephen Del Duca in the 2018 election, is ahead by 53% over his 34% over Stephen Del Duca now. I don't know if that's declared yet, but certainly a huge margin for the PC party in Stephen Del Duca's own riding. So it's going to be an uncomfortable night for him.
And polls have shown that Stephen Del Duca was polling behind. So this looks like that's where things are going. So unlikely that lead will be surpassed by Stephen Del Duca. I think he will lose.
Yeah, if not declared, it's all but declared, one would think, at that kind of lead. But good to check in with the out-of-town and out-of-region ridings, and if there's anything else that you guys notice as the night wears on, we're obviously happy to hear it. Now, as we wait for Mike Schreiner's speech, and we can't wait for that one, he gets set in Guelph to deliver that, we're going to kind of try to digress and look back on what the numbers look like. And as we mentioned, the Liberal Party still at single digits, just 9 so far, compared to the PC Party's 80, and the NDP coming in at 28. So the Green Party with just 1, which is obviously Mike Schreiner, and a lot of voting left to come in, joined by Andre Perella and Paul Byzanti, both from the area. Paul from Brantford, Andre a professor at Wilfrid Laurier, and we see Mike Schreiner ready to take the stage. We will send it to the Green Party's party.
Thank you, Guelph. Thank you, Guelph, so much. I want to say to everyone across this province, those of you who stood up and put yourself out there to be a candidate, thank you for doing that. Our democracy is better because of your service. Four years ago, we made history in Guelph, electing Ontario's first Green MPP. And we've made history again, re-electing Ontario's first Green MPP. We are proving that Greens are here to stay. We're building momentum across this riding and across this province. And I just want to say that up the road in Parry Sound, Muskoka, we have a tight race happening there as well. You know, to see a Green candidate so close in a riding that has always gone blue tells you that there is Green momentum. There is a green wave building across this province. It's not only in Guelph, it's in ridings all across Ontario. And I want to give a shout out to Matt Richter and his team for the amazing campaign they've run. You know, the race in Parry Sound, Muskoka is too close to call right now. And I just want Matt and his family who have worked so hard, and his team, the team that's bringing people-powered change, I want you to know that we're rooting you on for the rest of this evening. All of you in Guelph have shown that we can do politics differently in this province. Yes. That we can work across party lines. Yes. That we can put people before politics, people before partisanship. That we can ensure that we're going to continue fighting so that everyone has an affordable place to call home. That we invest in the frontline healthcare workers who care for us, and that mental health is health, and that as we build connected communities, we will fight to stop the sprawl and protect the places we love. To support small businesses and ensure our communities are climate ready. And so I want to take a moment to thank Green candidates in every riding in this province, because we've seen the Green vote go up in this election. Thank you for your hard work. And the candidates from all parties and all ridings, I encourage you to stay engaged. And I say to my fellow candidates here in Guelph, let's keep working together to build the green and caring city that we love here in Guelph. We need everyone to build the caring, connected, climate-ready Ontario we need. And so I say to the people of this province and in my community, over the last 4 years, I've fought hard to be your voice. And I will fight the next 4 years to be a strong opposition voice in the legislature. To make sure the issues that Ontarians care about are talked about, to bring forward new solutions to the housing affordability crisis, to the cost of living crisis, to the mental health crisis, and to the climate emergency. And make no mistake about it, we will continue to fight and work together at Queen's Park. I will work to amplify your voices, because we need change, especially when it comes to acting on the climate emergency. We cannot afford to wait. So I want to congratulate Mr. Ford and the PC party on your victory tonight. The people have spoken. The people have spoken. But at this critical moment in time, I ask you to consider the financial, the economic, and the climate implications of paving over the places we love, the farmland that feeds us, and the nature that protects us. I say this as a fellow Ontarian. The storms, floods, and extreme weather that we've experienced in the last month of this campaign alone shows us what's at stake. What's at stake for my children's future and your children's future. So I say to you, and I say to my opposition colleagues, that we have to work together to make sure this province is climate ready, to make sure that our infrastructure can withstand the storms we've experienced this past month, and to make sure that our economy is ready to be successful in the emerging markets of the new climate economy. Let's work together to get that done. So I want to conclude by thanking my deputy leaders, Abhijit Mane and Beaches East York, and Diane Sachs and University Rosedale, one of my climate heroes who put forward a climate plan that I ask all parties in the legislature to steal every idea in it, because let's build the Ontario we want. And I say to you both and to all of our candidates across the province, thank you for sharing our vision and increasing our vote total. And I wanted to give a quick shout out to my campaign manager here in Guelph, Diane Dance. And to Becky Smith, our provincial campaign manager, who more than anyone has built the Green Party into the party that it is today. To my family, my wife Sandy, my daughters Isabel and Beata, and my mom Barb, thank you so much for always being there for me and with me. And to all of our staff, our candidates, the volunteers, the people that power our campaigns, empowered my campaign here in Guelph, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for fighting for the Ontario you want. I will work hard for you. My commitment is I will continue to work hard for you to deliver the kind of leadership we need at Queen's Park to be your voice. Merci, miigwech, and thank you.
Mike Schreiner retaining his seat for Guelph, and how can you not love that guy?
It's great to see a guy rewarded for such hard work.
And obviously very quick to thank everyone that was a part of his victory. And do you think all 23,000 votes were in the crowd that tonight there? Because it seemed loud, it seemed alive, and it seemed very energetic.
Absolutely.
Well, it's clear, and he was right, he's sitting on a movement that is growing in Ontario. And we've seen this in other places. I mentioned Prince Edward Island not too long ago. But maybe the Green Party is being seen by many voters as the next viable alternative.
Yeah, and again, change is always on the horizon, especially in politics. And Schreiner very happy and not at all hesitant to cheer on his fellow Green Party leader, Matt Richter, up in Muskoka, who said it was a pretty close race. We don't have the numbers on our screen here, but apparently it could be anyone's ball game up by the water. So as this night wears on, and obviously the PC going to be a majority government, but the Green Party maybe a little bit of turning of the tide throughout Ontario.
Yeah, I think, as Andre was saying, there's viability to their platform. There's a real selection out there, and he speaks of hope. He speaks of benefiting democracy by giving a credible voice to those who want to prioritize climate as a legitimate priority in elections, and he's doing that. He did it in 2018, he's doing it again, and he's creating meaningful discussion around climate policy that didn't exist before he started working.
Yeah, and Guelph, a perfect place to get that started. A very big agricultural community. Obviously, the University of Guelph with that agricultural program and a ton of green space surrounding the Guelph area, whether it be Arkle or Puslinch or north in Aramasa. Guelph very, very reliant on the agricultural business and the green space that does, as Mike Schreiner said, feeds us and keeps our climate and environment alive and well. Gentlemen, that kind of approach and that victory speech was about as far from arrogant as you could get from a leader.
I've spoken with the man in very candid, informal settings, and nothing about what he just said sounded like any different tone of voice, any different body language. What you see is what you get with Mike Schreiner. He's the same thing in front of a camera as he is one-on-one with you in a small room in Brant Enterprises, just off West Avenue in Brantford, talking housing policy one-on-one.
He's got a certain natural charisma. It doesn't look fake. It doesn't look orchestrated or theatrical. It's just like you say, what you see is what you get, and people like that. And he seems honest.
Very much so. And as I mentioned a few years ago, he was the first one to say, listen, it's not going to get better without getting worse first. And that worked out for him in that first ever term for a Green Party leader. And it worked out again this year for Mike Schreiner and the Green Party in Guelph. And that will conclude our coverage for tonight. Hang on 1 second. We will actually sit tight as we wait for more votes to come in. And the PC Party, again, as a majority government, will sit steady, but obviously other ridings looking to see what unfolds as this night wears on.
Well, at the bottom of your screen there, you see that other category. That other category of one is a riding that I've spoken to a little bit here, and that's Haldimand County. The seat there is looking more and more like this is going to go towards Bobby Ann Brady. Right now, with 34 of 62 polls reporting, she's leading 34.2% to 30.7% over Ken Hewitt, the PC candidate and current mayor of Haldimand County. So it's very interesting. The polls leading into this were telling a completely different story, but that might be by virtue of the fact that Bobby Ann Brady is running as an independent, and the pollsters just couldn't pick up that granular level of detail in a riding like this. So very intriguing, to say the least.
And you called it from the early going in this evening. That one could be the wild card, and like you said, it is at this very moment. Now, gentlemen, a couple more ridings obviously to come in as the votes are slowly being tallied around the region. So what do you expect to see as our night kind of starts to turn the final bend into a close?
My question is, what are voters expecting to see? And how many voters are really tuning in? I don't mean our particular show, but tuning into this election. I'd like to know what the overall turnout ends up becoming, because I wouldn't be surprised if it's below 50%. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the election with the lowest turnout in Ontario history. So I'm curious as to what are voters thinking about all this? Do they care? Do they care enough? Or are some of them saying, should have voted? You know, I don't know, because this is the one election that I think that will stand out in history of having such a low turnout, unless the next election even has worse turnout. But I'm wondering how voters are going to view this, especially the losers. And people forget that democracies don't survive because parties win. Democracies survive because losers say, all right, I lost fair and square. What are losers saying to themselves tonight?
And that's a very poignant remark, Andre, because when we saw what happened south of the border on January 6th, the fracture that happened there came about as a result of the leaders not acknowledging the legitimacy of the election. And regardless of where you stand tonight, regardless of what you voted for, who you voted for, why you voted, if it was strategic, if it was motivated by a person, if it was motivated by a platform, the reality is that 60% of Ontarians will not have voted for the person who becomes the leader. And so Doug Ford's job right now is not to ignore you, to listen to you, and to try and create some unity within the people of Ontario, despite our diverse opinions, to move us forward as a province. And the cycles come and go in terms of PCs, Liberals, NDPs, or you name it. But as Ontarians, as Canadians, we are extremely privileged to live in this system and to express ourselves across. Look at the bottom of your screen. You've got 5 different colors at the bottom of your screen elected tonight, potentially elected, or very strong leads. I don't remember the last time we saw 5. You have to go to something federal to see that sort of thing. So let's celebrate that there is a diversity of opinion. Let's acknowledge that the people who voted differently than us still have a meaningful voice, even if their candidate wasn't the winner tonight.
I think that's been lost a lot in the last couple of elections. We tend to look at those who vote differently than us as the enemy, and we shouldn't. They're different. Different views, and it just should open up an opportunity to have a conversation. I think there's less of an appetite. I think people are just fed up and they want to lash out. So I'm hoping that even what we saw with Mike Schreiner's speech, that it may be inspiring some of us to say, maybe we should do politics more collaboratively and not just looking at our opponent as an enemy.
And hearing now that the turnout to this point in time, 31.7% have turned out. So, Andre, you called it likely a low for as long as memory serves, and that seems just drastically low.
That's pretty concerning. If that number bears out, that is a very concerning number.
I was expecting 47 as the low point, but you're saying 31?
31.7, yes.
That's indicative of something wrong.
I would tend to agree. I think everyone that hears that number would have to agree. That is, when you consider the numbers from 2018, 56.6, 2014, 51 and a third, and back to 2011, 48.2, 31.7. Obviously not all accounted for just yet, but concerningly low, that turnout at 31.7. A hurtful number, and obviously maybe something that makes everyone think we need to find a new approach to get voters out to the polls and to cast their vote. And it is every citizen's right to vote, but it is also their responsibility to educate themselves, to know what they're voting for, and maybe a different platform to make that a little bit more accessible could be a starting point, because obviously with today's day and age of being computer-based, a lot of politics can be learned from a young voter at the tip of their fingers.
Yeah, and truth be told, that's one of the goals of what we've tried to do in our chamber broadcast in partnership with Rogers TV is to bring access of what not just the parties are saying on their platforms, but what the local candidates are saying. Because as we've said time and time again tonight, it may be one thing to identify with a certain provincial platform, but if there's a charismatic or an energetic or a hope-inspiring leader in your riding, like Mike Schreiner, that eschews the popular platform, there's value in having a local voice that represents you, even if it's not in the leading party.
And it's obviously, again, Mike Schreiner's an easy example to revert back to. Not the leading party, but one of the most favorable in his area. And again, a great kind of guy to kind of start turning that tide and riding the wave of maybe change throughout politics. Obviously thanking the PC party and every other party for running, and kind of suggesting, why don't we all work together and try to make our country a better Canada to be a part of. So with that in mind, gentlemen, in your minds, obviously it's a tough question to answer, but moving forward, what needs to change to get those younger voters out there and get those younger voters to educate themselves to make their vote worthwhile?
Well, they need to feel empowered. And I think that is what's lacking. A lot of people don't engage in politics because they figure, what for? They won't listen to me. Even if they listen to me, they won't necessarily do anything about it. So it has to do with feeling empowered. But to be empowered in our system means you have to belong to the party that will win power. And I think we can learn a little bit about how government is structured in places like Nunavut, Northwest Territories, which is a consensus government. There are no political parties. Everybody's elected as an independent, and they govern in a consensus style. I think we can tear a page or two out of that style, out of that rule book, to bring more collaborative, to force people to be more collaborative and not just competitive. Because competition, especially the kind of competition we're seeing nowadays in politics, can drive away those who otherwise want to do good. And I think a more consensus style, a consensual style, a more collaborative style of politics would have wider appeal.
I would agree as well. And Paul?
Yeah, well, I think there is a burden that needs to be placed on Doug Ford's shoulders tonight. Much like when you win a party leadership contest, you have to unify the party afterwards. When you win a general election for the government of Ontario, you need to unify the province afterwards, and you need to empower the people that you want to vote for you next time. But there needs to be some serious work on behalf of maybe not just Doug Ford, but all politicians to get out there and listen to this population that, like everyone else in the world, has gone through 2 years of just some of the most devastating things that our generation has gone through. And there's the empowerment, the ability to engage with people who didn't show up to vote tonight. They didn't show up to vote tonight for a reason. And it's going to be important for our leaders to hear, understand that, and to try to affect some sort of change so that more of our population can take part in our democratic system.
Because what happens with those voters who didn't show up, when they do show up in large numbers, it's because they're angry.
Yeah.
And they turf out the government in power. So there is an incentive to reach out to those who did not show up.
So is that maybe a recipe for, I don't want to say disaster, but not success necessarily, when people vote out of anger or displeasure rather than voting for what they want?
Well, it's never good to have an electorate that is angry, because they may be driven more by emotion than reason. And so, again, you need to reach out to them. Also, the next 4 years may not look rosy economically. There is talk about a recession. So Doug Ford may be presiding over a recession. Governments don't usually last. They don't survive recessions. And when it's time for the next election, he may be turfed out for that reason alone. But mix into that some pent-up disenchantment, malaise. And if there is a political party out there that taps into that, it can really create some instability or some volatility in the Ontario electorate. Somebody may win, but they may win an angry electorate. I'm not too sure if that will produce a very fruitful future. Again, we want people to work together, not apart. We don't want civil wars or anything close to that. And I think when you have low turnout, people didn't show up not because they're bored with it. They didn't show up, again, for a reason. What is that reason? And I think it's incumbent on all the party leaders at all all politicians, all the candidates, to reach out to those communities. What concerns them?
It might be a changing of how that reaching out is done as well. It might have to be a completely different platform. You mentioned how a lot of politicians went door to door, and that might be the best way to get a hold of people these days. Back in the 90s, someone rang your doorbell, you'd race to the door to answer it first. Now when someone rings your doorbell, you're kind of dodging and who is that? But obviously change is needed, especially when it comes to voter turnout at just 31.7% as it stands at the moment. But with things moving along tonight, we are just waiting for everything to wrap up here throughout the local ridings. Mike Schreiner, again, king of Guelph, and a lot of PC leaders getting crowned throughout their ridings as well, gentlemen. So as we kind of take a final thoughts panel here, we will get your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at those numbers at the bottom, and to me, they paint a picture of tough questions for both the NDP caucus and the Liberal caucus. A gain of 2 seats with Stephen Del Duca losing in his riding of Vaughan. I'm just checking to make sure that's still current. Yeah, he is still well behind with 24 of 38 polls reporting. That is going to be a very uncomfortable situation for the Liberal Party. I mean, Stephen Del Duca has been involved with the Liberal Party of Ontario since he's been a teenager. No one knows the party better than him, but at this point, there's no meaningful gains to point to. And then you look at the NDP, Andrea Horwath's NDP party went from 40 down to 29. This is her 4th election as leader. Where does she go from here?
Well, there's one little thing that the Liberals have succeeded tonight, and that is I think they're now have achieved official party status.
There you go. Okay.
So that's important because
Yeah,
it grants them
yeah.
extra resources,
Yeah.
extra funding or budgets for the research and all that. So that is one little victory for the Liberals. But again, I agree. The NDP seems to have handed a lot of seats over to the PCs. They didn't do it on purpose, but that's the way it resulted. And leaders get blamed for that.
Yeah, and a Liberal silver lining, I guess you could call it in that case. Perth Wellington's polls just closed around 10:20, so those numbers will start to roll in as the moments tick away. So, gentlemen, it's just another PC majority government, and not really much of a surprise, as we had mentioned. And the Liberal Party, obviously, with back to the drawing board, but still with a few small victories, as mentioned. Mike Harris for the PC party in Kitchener-Conestoga. No real surprise there. Again, we'll just revert back to these winners as we have more numbers continuing to slowly roll in, but surely, and kind of just look around and kind of talk about anything that we can to make relevant in terms of these winners and what they mean for each and every riding.
Well, I think in your riding, you need to look at whether or not you've got a representative in the leading party, and that means one thing. If your riding is being represented at Queen's Park by an MPP in Doug Ford's Conservative caucus, that means that a lot of the policy that's going to be formed can have some local influence, and there's going to be some local engagement with municipalities that help inform some of that. And if that's not the case, let's look at Catherine Fife as an example. She was a critic to the Treasury Board. She was the official voice of opposition to anything that the PC government put out from a financial point of view. So if you're living in Waterloo, or if you're living in Kitchener Centre, you're going to reach out to Laura May Lindo as well, and you're going to speak to them about the concerns you have about what the PC party is doing in their various roles. And once government is formed and once caucus meets, they're going to assign cabinet positions, they're going to assign critic positions. Pay attention to the specific role that your MPP has and use that. Don't just carpet bomb the constituency office with complaints, but pay attention to the portfolio that they're responsible for and speak meaningfully to what they have a voice in Queen's Park for. And if you could tap into that, then you have meaningful representation and you could have real dialogue in Queen's Park.
And official numbers coming from Perth Wellington with the PC party winning yet again in that riding. So it was a late closure for their polls, but PC party again taking yet another seat throughout Ontario.
Not surprising. They won by 9,000 votes last time, so I would have been surprised if this would have been a totally different result.
Yeah, Matthew Ray, a young new candidate, but again, he's been involved in party politics for a little while. He was involved as a campaign manager for other MPPs, and now we see him taking the helm of that Perth Wellington riding, a largely rural riding, but no less important than any other riding in Ontario.
And with that, we'll just get Andre's final thoughts as well before we wrap up for the evening.
Well, one other thing I wanted to add to what Paul was saying about getting in touch with your local MPP. They don't just sit in the legislature and give speeches. They also sit on committees that discuss legislation, policy. So it's good to get involved because your local MPP, even if they're an opposition MPP, may actually have a seat at a committee that is drafting policy. It's an opportunity for you to have access to that policy making. So I think with this, we all need to pay more attention to what our local representatives are doing.
Any final thoughts, Paul?
Well, again, we're seeing democracy in action here. Concerned about the voter turnout. We'll see what the final numbers look like in the morning. Big congratulations to all the winners tonight. It's not easy to put your family through a campaign, and nor is it easy to take on 4 years of representing a riding. There's a lot of angry phone calls you're going to take. There's going to be a lot of happy phone calls you take as well. But there's a lot of work ahead of the government that's being formed tonight. And we just wish our best to everyone who's been elected, congratulate them on a well-run campaign, and we look forward to seeing how we form government. And the next big thing is going to be who gets what portfolio. That's where all the fun stuff happens.
Tireless and thankless work being a politician. Thank you so much for joining us here on Rogers TV tonight. That concludes our coverage for the evening. For more local results, you can keep watching. We'll be running a full page with all of the results throughout the night. For speeches from the party candidates, please tune in to City News. Thank you to Andre Perella and Paul Byzanti for joining us tonight. On behalf of both of them and everyone else here at Rogers TV, for local results, I'm Scott Fraser, and good night.